Sign it, her father said, sliding the contract across the table as if Emily Carter were nothing more than ink, paper, and debt. You were born to pay what we owe. For one terrible second, the whole house went silent, and Emily heard everything inside that silence. The old clock ticking above the fireplace, the winter wind pressing its fingers against the windows, the soft, frightened breath of her little sister standing behind their stepmother's skirt. The contract waited beneath the yellow lamp, its edges stamped with the black crest of Alpha Victor Ashford, a man whose name made even grown wolves lower their voices. Emily did not reach for the pen. She looked at her father instead, searching his face for one last piece of the man who had once carried her on his shoulders through the county fair and bought her apple cider when she was 6. There was nothing there now but exhaustion, shame, and the kind of cowardice that dressed itself up as necessity. The debt is due tonight, he said, not meeting her eyes. Victor agreed to clear all of it if you go with him. Her stepmother's hand tightened around little Grace's shoulder. Not hard, not cruel enough for anyone to call it cruel, but enough. Enough for Emily to understand the choice being placed before her. If she refused, Grace would be next. The thought moved through Emily like ice water. She was 21 years old enough to know that families could smile while breaking you, old enough to understand that some cages were built with words like duty, sacrifice, and love. Across the room, Alpha Victor Ashford stood in a dark wool coat, polished boots planted on the rug, as if he already owned the floor beneath her. His pale eyes traveled over Emily with the casual interest of a buyer inspecting something fragile and replaceable. She is smaller than promised, he said. But she is young, quiet, and unmated. I will accept her. The words should have made Emily flinch. They did not. She had spent years learning how to keep her face still while people decided what she was worth. Weak omega. Extra mouth. Bad luck in a white dress. Her skin was fair, almost colorless beneath the lamplight, her blonde hair pinned too tightly at the nape of her neck, her hands folded in her lap so no one would see them shake. Victor stepped closer and placed a silver collar on the table beside the contract. It looked delicate, almost elegant, until the metal caught the light and Emily's wolf recoiled deep inside her chest. A formality, he said, until she learns obedience. Grace made a tiny sound. Emily looked at her sister, at the child's wide blue eyes filling with tears she was trying not to shed, and the last soft part of Emily's heart made its decision. She picked up the pen. The room seemed to tilt around her. Her name waited on the bottom line like an open grave. Emily Carter. Daughter. Omega. Debt. She signed before fear could stop her. The moment the ink dried, Victor smiled. From tonight on, he said, lifting the collar, you belong to me. Emily rose without a word. The metal touched her throat, cold enough to steal her breath, but she did not bow her head. She let him fasten it because Grace was still safe behind her, still breathing, still free. Outside, the first snow of the season drifted over the porch steps as Victor's men led Emily toward the black SUV waiting at the curb. Her father stayed in the doorway. He did not call her back. He did not say goodbye. Emily stepped into the winter night with the contract folded in Victor's hand and the collar resting against her pulse like a promise the world had made to crush her. Then, from the dark woods beyond the driveway, a sound rose through the falling snow. Not a normal howl, not a warning. It was deeper, older, threaded with pain and command, the kind of sound that made every wolf in the yard freeze where they stood. Victor's smile vanished. His men turned toward the trees. Emily forgot how to breathe. Somewhere in that forest, something powerful was calling from a trap it could not escape. And for reasons she could not understand, every instinct in her broken heart whispered that the creature was not calling for help from them. It was calling for her. The sound faded, but the fear it left behind stayed in the yard like frost on glass. For a moment, no one moved. The snow kept falling in slow, silent pieces, gathering on the shoulders of Victor Ashford's men, softening the edges of the black SUV, turning Emily's old neighborhood into something unreal and watchful. Then the howl came again, lower this time, strained and uneven, as if the creature making it had used the last of its strength to reach the world. One of Victor's guards took a step back. That is not from this pack, he whispered. Victor's jaw tightened. Get her in the vehicle. His hand closed around Emily's upper arm, firm enough to remind her that the ink on the contract had dried, firm enough to tell her that compassion was no longer permitted. Emily should have obeyed. She should have climbed into the back seat, kept her eyes down, and let the road carry her away from the only home that had ever rejected her. Instead, she turned her head toward the tree line. The woods behind the Carter house stretched for miles, a dense wall of pine and bare oak that locals avoided after dark. Even humans in town knew not to wander there during winter. Things moved between those trees that did not belong to ordinary maps. The air shifted again, and beneath the clean scent of snow, Emily caught something sharp and wrong. Burned silver. Fear. A wild, bitter pain that made her wolf press against her ribs with a trembling whine. "Please," Emily said, barely above a breath. "Something is hurt." Victor stared at her as if she had spoken in another language. "Something royal is hurt," one of the men corrected, his face pale beneath the porch light. That sounded like a king's hound. The words moved through the group like a match dropped near gasoline. King's hound. Emily had heard stories about them as a child. The Alpha King's private war wolves, larger than normal shifters, older in blood, trained to guard the northern throne and answer to no one but King Alexander Hayes himself. They were not pets. They were not soldiers. They were living warnings. No sane person approached one in the dark. Victor glanced toward the woods, then toward the road, calculation flickering behind his eyes. "We saw nothing," he said. "If a royal beast is dying on Carter land, it is not our concern." Emily looked at him then, truly looked at him, and something quiet inside her hardened. "You would leave it there?" "I would leave a thunderstorm outside if it did not belong to me." He shoved her toward the SUV. The collar at her throat tightened with the movement, cold biting into her skin, but Emily planted her boots in the snow. Her dress was too thin for the weather, her hands already numb, her signed life folded inside Victor's coat, yet all she could hear was that broken call from the trees. She thought of Grace behind the window, still safe because Emily had chosen to go. She thought of herself kneeling by the table, traded for a number written in red ink. She thought of any living thing caught in metal, waiting for powerful people to decide it was inconvenient to care. The third sound from the forest was not a howl. It was a soft, rough whimper, and it broke whatever obedience the collar had not. Emily pulled free and ran. Snow swallowed the hem of her dress as she crossed the yard. Victor shouted her name, but she did not turn back. Branches caught at her sleeves. Frozen weeds brushed her ankles. The woods closed around her with the heavy silence of a church after a funeral. Behind her, boots cursed through the snow, but the men did not move quickly. Fear slowed them. Emily followed the scent of silver until she found the clearing. At first, all she saw was darkness against darkness. Then two amber eyes opened beneath the shadow of a fallen pine. The wolf was enormous, black as midnight, his body half hidden by snow and broken branches. A silver trap circled one front leg, its chain twisted around a buried root. The metal pulsed with a dull, poisonous glow. Emily stopped several feet away, her breath turning white in front of her mouth. Every instinct told her to kneel lower, speak softer, make herself smaller than danger. The wolf lifted his head, and a low warning rolled through the clearing, not loud, but deep enough to tremble in Emily's bones. Victor's men halted behind her. "Back away," one of them said. "That thing could end you before you blink." Emily did not look away from the wolf. His eyes were furious, but beneath the fury was exhaustion. Beneath the exhaustion was the same silent question she had carried from the house. "Will anyone stop long enough to see I am still alive?" Slowly, she raised both empty hands. The silver collar chilled against her pulse. "I am not here to hurt you," she whispered. "I know what chains feel like." The wolf's growl faltered. Victor's voice cut through the trees behind her, cold and furious. "Emily, step away from that beast." But she was already moving closer, one careful inch at a time, until the wounded hound's breath warmed the snow between them and his amber eyes fixed on her as if, somehow, impossibly, he had been waiting for the one person in the world who was not afraid enough to leave. Emily moved close enough to see the trap clearly, and the sight made her stomach tighten. The silver jaws had locked around the hound's front leg, not deep enough to destroy him, but cruel enough to keep him pinned, weakened, and afraid. The chain disappeared beneath a frozen root, coated with symbols that looked older than any pack law Emily had ever been taught. This was not a hunter's mistake. This was planned. The black wolf watched her with burning amber eyes, his chest rising in slow, uneven breaths. Snow clung to his fur in white stars, melting where his body still held heat. He was massive, easily taller at the shoulder than any wolf Emily had seen, but in that moment he did not look like a monster. He looked like something powerful forced to wait, while lesser creatures decided whether he deserved mercy. Emily knew that feeling too well. "Do not touch it," Victor snapped from behind her. "That is royal property, and you are mine." The word mine landed colder than the snow. Emily did not answer him. She lowered herself to her knees, keeping her movements gentle, her palms open. The collar at her throat tightened when she leaned forward, as if the silver itself disapproved of kindness. The hound's lips lifted slightly, showing teeth bright as moonlit bone. One bite could have ended everything. Emily did not pull away. "You can warn me," she whispered, her voice soft enough to belong to the falling snow. "You can hate me if you need to, but I am still going to help." The growl trembled, then thinned into a rough breath. Behind her, Victor made a sharp sound of disgust. "Drag her back." Two guards stepped forward, but the hound's head lifted. A single rumble rolled from his chest, and both men stopped as if the trees themselves had ordered them still. Emily did not understand why he protected her. She only knew she had been given a few seconds, and sometimes a few seconds were all mercy needed. She reached for the trap. The instant her fingers touched the silver, pain flashed up her arm, bright and clean and breath-stealing. She bit down on a gasp, refusing to give Victor the pleasure of hearing it. The metal was freezing and burning at the same time, humming with poison beneath her skin. Her hands shook as she searched for the release catch. "Stupid girl," Victor said. "You are ruining what little value you have." Emily pressed harder. The latch resisted. She pulled again, and the edge of the trap scraped her palm. No blood spilled, only a thin line of red that stung beneath the cold, but the hound's eyes changed. The fury in them sharpened into something almost human. Concern. Recognition. "It is all right," Emily breathed, though nothing was all right, though her throat ached beneath the collar and her knees were sinking into snow. "They sold me too, but I will not leave you in chains." The words seemed to pass through the clearing like a spell. The hound went still. Emily found the catch, twisted with both hands, and the silver jaws opened with a sudden dull snap. The wolf did not leap. He did not run. He only lowered his head until his muzzle rested inches from her burned fingers. Emily tore a long strip from the hem of her white dress, the fabric giving way with a soft rip that sounded strangely final. The dress had been chosen to make her look harmless, presentable, easy to hand over. Now she used it to bind the hound's leg, wrapping carefully, tying the cloth firm but not tight. Victor stormed closer. "Enough." His hand caught her shoulder and pulled her back. Emily stumbled, but before she could fall, the black wolf rose. Not fully, not easily, yet even half weakened, he became a wall between her and Victor. Snow slid from his broad back, his amber eyes fixed on the alpha who had called Emily property, and the clearing went silent in a way that felt larger than fear. Victor froze. The guards lowered their eyes. Emily stared at the hound, unable to breathe. He was protecting her. The creature every man here feared had chosen to stand in front of the girl no one wanted. Then his gaze shifted down to her hand. His nose brushed her palm with impossible gentleness. Warm breath passed over the place where silver had burned her skin, and beneath the thin red mark, something awakened. A pale silver light flickered once beneath Emily's skin, small as a hidden star. She pulled her hand to her chest, startled, but the light did not fade. It spread in the shape of a delicate mark across her wrist, one she had never seen before and somehow felt she had been born missing. Far beyond the clearing, deep in the trees, another sound answered. Not a howl this time. Hooves. No. Boots moving through snow. Many of them. Ordered. Fast. Victor's face drained of color. The guards turned toward the darkness as torches appeared between the pines, blue-white flames carried by men in black armor marked with the royal crest. The hound gave one low, exhausted sound and leaned closer to Emily, as if warning her that the danger had not ended. It had only changed shape. A voice cut through the forest, calm, deep, and absolute. "Step away from my hound." Emily looked up, silver mark glowing against her wrist, and saw the royal soldiers part for a tall man in a dark coat, his pale face unreadable beneath the falling snow, his gray eyes fixed first on the injured wolf, then on her collar, then on the torn contract in Victor's trembling hand. The man who stepped through the line of royal soldiers did not raise his voice, but the forest obeyed him anyway. Snow seemed to fall more quietly around him. The guards behind Victor lowered their heads before they even realized they were doing it. Even the wind moved differently, bending through the black pines as if making room for something older than rank. Emily had never seen King Alexander Hayes in person, but every wolf in the Northern Territories knew the stories. The Alpha King with winter-gray eyes. The ruler who ended border wars with a single command. The man whose private hound answered to no one else alive. He was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a dark overcoat dusted with snow, his white skin stark against the night, his expression carved from cold control. His gaze moved over the clearing once, and in that single glance he seemed to measure everything. The poisoned silver trap, the torn strip of Emily's dress around the hound's leg, the collar at her throat, Victor's hand still clamped around the contract, and the pale mark glowing faintly on Emily's wrist. No one spoke. Then Shadow, the massive black hound, lowered his head with a tired sound that was not quite a whimper and not quite a greeting. Something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Not fear, never fear, but a sharp, contained alarm that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Who touched him, he asked. Victor dropped to one knee so fast his coat brushed the snow. Your Majesty, I found the beast already wounded. The girl was near him. She may have tampered with royal property. I was bringing her to my estate when she ran into the woods without permission. Emily's breath caught. The lie came so smoothly, it almost sounded practiced. Victor did not look at her when he spoke. Men like him never looked at the things they intended to bury. Alexander's eyes shifted to Emily. The weight of that gaze struck harder than any shout. It was not cruel, but it was immense, a pressure like standing at the edge of a frozen lake and hearing the ice groan beneath your feet. Is that true? He asked. Emily wanted to answer calmly. She wanted her voice to come out strong and certain. Instead, the silver collar tightened with her fear, and the words scraped her throat. No, Your Majesty. Victor's head snapped toward her. Careful. Emily looked at the hound beside her, at the bandage made from her ruined dress, at the trap still open in the snow. He was caught when I found him. I opened the trap. A murmur passed through the royal soldiers. Alexander's face did not change. With what tools? My hands. This time the silence felt dangerous. One of the soldiers glanced at her palms. Another looked at the silver mark on her wrist and quickly looked away. Victor rose halfway, anger breaking through his polished mask. She is confused. She is a low omega under contract, frightened and disobedient. I claim responsibility for her behavior. The word claim made Shadow lift his head. A low rumble moved through him, soft but unmistakable. Alexander heard it. Everyone did. His attention dropped to the collar at Emily's throat. Under contract, he repeated. Victor straightened, sensing safer ground. He pulled the folded paper from inside his coat and held it out with both hands. A lawful debt transfer, signed by her father and by the girl herself. Emily Carter was given to me tonight in payment. I have every right to move her through my territory. Alexander did not take the contract at first. He only looked at it, as if the paper smelled worse than the poisoned silver in the snow. Then he reached out. Victor placed it in his hand. Emily watched the Alpha King unfold the pages, and with every second his expression became colder, not louder, not wilder, simply colder, until the clearing felt less like winter and more like judgment. This was signed tonight. Alexander asked. Yes, Your Majesty. After sunset? Victor hesitated. Yes. With a silver restraint already prepared? The guards behind Victor grew very still. Emily felt her pulse beat against the collar. Victor's smile thinned. A precaution. She is an omega with no pack standing. Alexander looked up at last. His gray eyes settled on Victor, and for the first time, the Alpha's confidence faltered. No pack standing does not make a person property. The words were quiet, but they landed through the clearing like iron gates closing. Victor swallowed. Of course, Your Majesty. I only meant legally. Under old debt law, she is bound until repayment is satisfied. Emily stood frozen, too afraid to hope, too tired not to. Shadow shifted closer, his injured leg held carefully above the snow, his body still between her and Victor. Alexander saw that too. His gaze moved from the hound to Emily again, slower this time, as if something impossible was arranging itself in front of him. "My hound does not shield strangers," he said. Victor's face went pale. "The beast is injured. It is reacting without sense." Shadow's amber eyes flashed. Alexander folded the contract once, neatly, and handed it to one of his soldiers. "Take them all to the royal court. Lord Ashford, your men, the trap, the contract, and the girl." Emily's heart dropped. Court meant judgment. Court meant nobles, laws, witnesses, and people who could turn a whisper into a sentence. Victor bowed, but relief sharpened his mouth, as if he believed the old laws would still protect him once they stood under marble and banners. Alexander stepped closer to Emily. She forced herself not to step back. Up close, he smelled of pine, cold air, and something electric beneath control. His eyes lowered to the silver collar. "Did you agree to wear that?" he asked. Emily thought of Grace in the window, her father at the table, the pen in her hand. The word agree suddenly seemed too small for what had happened. "I agreed to keep someone else from wearing it," she whispered. Alexander's jaw tightened, just once. Then he turned toward the soldiers. "Remove nothing yet. I want the court to see exactly how she was brought to me." Victor opened his mouth, but Alexander's voice cut through the forest before a single objection could form. "And Ashford?" Victor froze. "Yes, Your Majesty." The Alpha King lifted his eyes from the collar to the man who had called Emily his. "When we arrive, you will explain who taught you that a contract can own a living soul." The royal court did not feel like a place built for justice. To Emily, it felt like a place built to make small people remember how small they were. The great hall rose around her in walls of white stone and black banners, every arch carved with wolves, crowns, and old victories no one had asked the weak to survive. Fire burned in tall iron sconces, but the warmth never reached the center of the floor where Emily stood with snow melting at the hem of her torn dress and the silver collar still resting against her throat. Above her, on tiered seats shaped like a half-moon, the High Council watched in silence. Alphas in dark suits, elders with silver hair, noble women in winter silk. Every eye measured her the way Victor had measured her in her father's house. Only now the room was larger, the judgment cleaner, the cruelty dressed in law. Victor Ashford stood several feet away, freshly composed, his coat brushed free of snow, his face arranged into wounded dignity. He looked almost respectable beneath the chandeliers. Emily, with her burned palms hidden against her skirt and her dress torn for a hound's bandage, knew exactly how the court would see them. He looked like a lord. She looked like trouble. King Alexander Hayes sat on the black throne at the far end of the hall, silent and pale beneath the crowned shadow of the room. Shadow lay at the foot of the dais, his injured leg bound in white cloth, his amber eyes never leaving Emily. That alone made the council restless. The royal warhound did not rest near strangers. He did not track the breathing of an Omega girl as if she were the only steady thing in a room full of predators. A councilman with a narrow face rose first. "Your Majesty, before this assembly considers accusations against Lord Ashford, we must address the matter of ownership." The word moved through Emily like a cold hand. Ownership, not guardianship, not protection, not even custody. Ownership. Alexander's expression did not change. "Read the contract." A royal clerk stepped forward, unrolled the pages, and began. Each sentence made Emily feel as if she were being placed on the table piece by piece. Her age, her rank, her father's name, the amount of the debt, the transfer of service, movement, residence, and obedience to Victor Ashford until satisfaction of repayment. The language was polished, legal, bloodless. That made it worse. It did not sound like a crime. It sounded like business. When the clerk reached Emily's signature, a ripple of approval passed through several elders. Victor bowed his head with careful humility. As the court can hear, she signed willingly. Emily felt every face turn toward her. Her throat tightened against the collar. Willingly. The word had followed her all the way here like a ghost. Before she could speak, the doors opened at the back of the hall. Richard Carter entered with Mary Ann and little Grace. Under royal escort, Emily's heart pulled painfully at the sight of her sister, bundled in a blue coat, eyes swollen from crying. Marianne kept one hand on the child's shoulder, still using softness like a leash. Richard would not look at Emily. The narrow-faced councilman addressed him. "Did you sign this debt transfer?" Richard's voice came out thin. "Yes." "Did your daughter sign in your presence?" "Yes." "Was she forced?" The hall became so quiet Emily could hear wax dripping from a candle. Richard's eyes lifted for half a second, met Emily's, then fell away. "No," he said. Something inside Emily did not break. It had already broken in the house. This was only the echo. Marian spoke next, smooth as polished glass. "Emily has always understood her duty to this family. She has no position, no mate, no useful prospects." Lord Ashford offered a respectable arrangement. Grace made a small, broken sound, but Marianne's fingers tightened, and the child went still. Alexander's eyes moved to that hand. Shadow noticed too. A low vibration stirred in his chest. Several council members shifted uneasily. Victor seized the moment. "Your Majesty, the girl is emotional. She ran from lawful transport, interfered with your hound, and now stands before this court attempting to turn a private debt matter into scandal. I request she be returned to my custody before more damage is done." Returned. Custody. Damage. Emily stared at the marble beneath her feet, seeing the snow in the forest, the trap, the hound lowering his head to her burned hand. She had been silent in her father's house to protect Grace. She had been silent in the SUV because fear had sat beside her like another passenger. But in this hall, with every powerful voice trying to rename her cage, something small and steady rose from the place they had not managed to own. "I signed because my sister was next," Emily said. The words were quiet, but they carried. Heads turned. Victor's mouth hardened. Richard closed his eyes. No one said that aloud. Emily continued. "They did not have to." Marianne's face sharpened. "This is a dramatic invention." Emily lifted her chin. "Then let Grace answer." The child flinched as. "I found her." Marianne's hand tightened again. Before anyone could object, Shadow rose. Slowly, carefully. Yet the movement of the royal hound standing was enough to drain the color from half the room. He did not growl loudly. He did not need to. He walked down from the dais, each step measured, and placed himself between Emily and the council, his black body a living wall of warning. The hall erupted in whispers. Alexander stood. Silence fell at once. His gaze swept over the contract, the collar, Richard's bowed head, Marianne's hand on Grace, Victor's false calm, and finally Emily's pale face. "If this contract is lawful," he said, "then it can survive being read aloud before the wolves." The councilman frowned. "Your Majesty?" Alexander's voice deepened, calm and absolute. "Open the northern doors." A wave of alarm passed through the court. Beyond those doors was the Moon Court, the stone yard where royal wolves gathered only for coronations, executions of law, and blood oaths. Victor looked suddenly less certain. Emily felt Shadow's shoulder brush her side, warm and solid beneath the chill of the hall. Alexander took the contract from the clerk and held it up for every noble to see. "Let every clause be spoken where no perfume, title, or old law can hide the scent of fear." Then his eyes settled on Victor. "And let us see what kind of agreement makes a child tremble and a king's hound kneel at an Omega's feet." The northern doors opened with a sound like winter entering the room. Cold air swept across the marble floor, carrying the scent of snow, pine, and hundreds of wolves waiting beyond the Moon Court. Emily stood at the edge of the threshold with Shadow pressed close to her side, his warmth the only thing that kept the silver collar from feeling like the center of the world. Outside, the stone yard stretched beneath a black sky, ringed by high walls and watchtowers. Royal wolves lined the steps and balconies in silence, their eyes reflecting torchlight like scattered stars. No one laughed now. No one called her a debt. Yet the contract in Alexander's hand seemed heavier than before, as if the paper knew it had been dragged somewhere lies could not. "Brief." The royal clerk began reading again, his voice stiff in the cold. At first, the words were the same polished phrases Emily had already heard in the hall. Transfer of obligation. Satisfaction of repayment. Lawful surrender of service. But as the final clause left his mouth, the ink on the page began to move. A murmur spread through the court. Black lines bled through the parchment, twisting under the original writing like roots beneath frozen ground. The clerk stopped. Alexander did not. Continue, he ordered. The man swallowed and read the hidden words as they surfaced one by one. Binding of body. Suppression of wolf. Transfer of blood claim upon verification of royal compatibility. Emily did not understand the sentence, but Victor did. His calm mask cracked for the first time. That is not part of the agreement I presented, he said quickly. Alexander looked at him. No, it is part of the agreement you concealed. The council stirred, alarmed whispers rising and breaking against the stone walls. One elder stepped forward, face pale. Royal compatibility is forbidden language. Those clauses were outlawed after the Queen Blood massacres. The words passed through Emily without meaning at first. Queen Blood. Massacres. Forbidden. Then the mark on her wrist warmed beneath her sleeve, answering a name she had never been given. Shadow suddenly staggered. His front leg slipped on the stone, and a rough breath tore from him. Emily turned before anyone else moved. The white cloth around his wound had darkened with a silver-gray stain, spreading as if the poison buried in the trap had only been waiting for the old words to wake. Shadow, Alexander said, and for the first time his voice lost its perfect stillness. Royal healers rushed forward with leather cases and glass vials, forming a circle around the hound. Emily tried to step closer, but two guards blocked her path. Do not interfere, one healer said. This is beyond an omega. Shadow's amber eyes found Emily through the space between bodies. Not Alexander. Not the healers. Her. His chest rose and fell too quickly, each breath a quiet fight against the curse moving through him. The healers worked fast, speaking in low commands, pressing silver neutralizing stones near the wound, drawing symbols over his fur with blue chalk. Nothing changed. The stain kept spreading. A thin fear moved through the wolves around the court, not loud, but deep. If the Alpha King's own hound could fall here, under royal torches, what else had Victor's hidden contract awakened? Emily's hands curled at her sides. The silver collar tightened when she leaned forward. Let me try, she said. No one listened. The lead healer snapped, stand back. Alexander's gaze lifted to her, sharp and searching. He had every reason to refuse. She was untrained, collared, named in a cursed contract, a girl who had signed herself away less than 1 hour ago. But Shadow made a sound then, low and broken, and dragged his muzzle across the stone toward Emily. The entire court saw it. The hound was asking. Alexander stepped aside. Let her through. The healers protested at once. Alexander did not repeat himself. Emily crossed the cold stone with her heart beating so hard it seemed to shake the mark beneath her skin. She knelt beside Shadow and placed one trembling hand on his head. His fur was damp with snow, his breath warm against her wrist. She had no spell, no training, no noble blood she knew of. Only a strange memory rising from somewhere deeper than childhood, a melody without words, soft as a mother humming in a room lit by moonlight. Emily began to sing. The sound was barely more than breath at first, but the wolves went still. The torches bent inward. The mark on her wrist opened like a silver flower beneath her skin, and light spilled through her fingers into Shadow's dark fur. The gray stain stopped spreading. Then, slowly, it began to draw back from his leg, thread by thread, like smoke being pulled out of water. Gasps lifted around the court. Victor stumbled one step backward. Marianne covered her mouth. Richard whispered something that sounded like a prayer or an apology. Emily kept singing, even as the collar burned cold against her throat and the old hidden clauses on the contract turned blacker in Alexander's hand. Shadow's breathing steadied. His head grew heavier beneath her palm, not with weakness now, but trust. When the last trace of silver poison faded, the hound opened his amber eyes and lowered his muzzle to the stone before Emily. Not in exhaustion. In respect. The moon court fell silent. One by one, the royal wolves beyond the doors lowered their heads. The lead healer dropped to his knees, staring at the glowing mark on Emily's wrist. That is impossible, he whispered. Alexander looked at the mark, then at the dark contract, then at Emily as if the world had just changed shape in front of him. No, he said quietly. It is not impossible. His gray eyes turned toward Victor, cold enough to still every breath in the court. It is exactly what he was searching for. Victor Ashford stopped looking like a man defending a contract and started looking like a man watching a locked door open from the wrong side. His eyes went first to the glowing mark on Emily's wrist, then to the royal wolves bowing beyond the northern doors, then to King Alexander, who held the blackened contract as if it were no longer paper but evidence breathing in his hand. "This is hysteria," Victor said, but his voice had lost its polish. A frightened Omega hummed over an injured animal. "The court is allowing superstition to replace law." No one answered him. Even the elders who had spoken so confidently about ownership now kept their mouths closed, their faces pale beneath the torchlight. The hidden clauses on the contract continued to darken, revealing lines that had not been visible before. Names appeared in narrow script along the bottom margin. Not signatures. Records. Emily stared as the clerk read them aloud, one by one, each name belonging to an Omega girl transferred through debt houses, border estates, and private pacts over the last 12 years. Some names made council members flinch. Some made the royal healers look at the ground. Too many names did not seem to belong to anyone who was still alive. Emily's stomach turned cold. She had thought her family had sold her to pay one debt. Instead, she had stepped into a machine that had been waiting for a girl with the right blood to be desperate enough to sign herself away. Alexander descended the steps from the throne with terrifying calm. "You were not buying servants," he said. "You were hunting bloodlines." Victor's mouth opened, but no denial came quickly enough. Shadow rose beside Emily, steady now, his black coat still marked with the white strip of her torn dress. His eyes fixed on Victor with a silence more frightening than any roar. Then Richard Carter made a sound from the back of the hall, a broken breath that pulled Emily's attention like a thread. Her father looked smaller than she had ever seen him, his shoulders bent beneath something heavier than debt. "I did not know what he wanted her for," Richard whispered. Marianne turned on him. "Be quiet." But Grace slipped from her stepmother's grip and ran to Emily, stopping only when a guard stepped between them. Emily's heart twisted. Richard's hands shook as he reached inside his coat and pulled out a small silver locket, tarnished with age, its chain wrapped in a faded blue ribbon. "We found her with this," he said. 21 years ago, after the fire near the eastern border. She was a baby. There were royal soldiers everywhere, and then there were none. We took her in. We should have told her." The moon court seemed to tilt. Alexander went completely still. One elder took the locket, opened it with trembling fingers, and sank to one knee. Inside was not a portrait, but a crest, a silver wolf beneath a crown of stars, the old seal of the vanished queen bloodline. Emily could not move. The cold, the collar, the watching court, all of it blurred around the small object in the elder's hand. Her life had been a room full of locked doors, and now strangers were opening them in front of everyone. Victor saw the court turning. He saw the law slipping out of his reach. Panic sharpened him into something reckless. "She is still bound," he said, raising his voice. "Bloodline or not," she signed. "The contract recognizes me as claimant." Alexander's eyes cut to him. "The contract recognizes a traitor as a claimant." That was when the man standing behind Victor moved. He had been dressed as a junior royal guard, silent and forgettable beside the pillars, but his hand flashed toward the inside of his sleeve, where silver caught the torchlight. The court gasped. Emily saw the blade point toward Alexander before she understood the danger. Her body moved before fear could catch it. "Alexander," she cried. Shadow lunged between them like a storm given shape, knocking the false guard aside without a single unnecessary motion. Royal soldiers closed around the man at once, forcing the weapon to the floor and pinning his wrists behind his back. No blood touched the marble. No scream followed. Only the silver knife spinning once before stopping at Emily's feet. The mark on her wrist burned bright. Alexander turned slowly toward Victor. The false guard sleeve had torn just enough to reveal a black brand on his forearm, the same symbol now rising through the ink of the contract. A rebellion mark. A hidden oath. The proof Victor could no longer smooth away with noble words. "You brought an assassin into my court," Alexander said. Victor stepped back, face drained. "I did no such thing." The captured man laughed once, breathless and bitter. He promised the Queen Blood girl would open the old gates. He promised the throne would fall before dawn. The words passed through the court like thunder trapped under stone. Victor's mask finally shattered. "She was supposed to be ordinary," he snapped, pointing at Emily. "A quiet Omega, grateful to survive. Not this." Emily looked at him, at the man who had bought her, named her property, and planned to use whatever lived inside her without ever seeing the person around it. For the first time that night, she did not feel small. She walked forward, past the fallen knife, past the staring nobles, until she stood beneath the cold light of the moon court with Grace crying softly behind her and Shadow at her side. She lifted her marked wrist, silver light trembling over her skin. "I was never yours to sell," she said. The wolves beyond the doors answered, not with chaos, but with one low, unified sound that made every old law in the room feel suddenly fragile. Alexander stepped beside Emily, close enough that the mark on her wrist flared toward him like a star finding its sky, and Victor Ashford finally understood that the girl he had purchased to pay a debt had become the witness who would end him. The court waited for King Alexander Hayes to pass judgment, but he did not look at Victor first. He looked at Emily. That frightened the nobles more than anger would have. Anger was familiar in an alpha king. Anger had rules. This silence did not. Alexander held the contract in one hand, the dark clauses crawling across its surface like stains trying to hide from the moonlight. In the other hand, he held the small tarnished locket that carried the crest of Emily's stolen bloodline. Between those two objects stood the entire lie of her life. One said she had been sold, the other whispered she had been hidden. Victor straightened as much as he could with royal guards on either side of him, clinging to the last piece of law that still seemed to protect him. "Your Majesty," he said, voice tight but desperate, "whatever private schemes are being alleged here, the agreement remains valid until formally voided." The girl signed. Her father signed. Debt law does not disappear because of sentiment. A few elders shifted uneasily. Old law was ugly, but it was still law, and everyone in the room knew how often powerful people survived by hiding cruelty inside tradition. Emily felt Grace's small hand slip into hers. Her sister's fingers were cold. Shadow stood on Emily's other side, his black shoulder steady against her hip, no longer wounded in spirit, no longer waiting for permission to choose. Alexander stepped down from the last stair of the dais. "Emily Carter," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice was nothing like the clerk reading it from a contract. It did not make her smaller. It made the room turn toward her as if she had become the center of gravity. "Do you ask this court for revenge?" Victor's eyes flashed with fear. Marian held her breath. Richard covered his face. Emily looked at them all, at the father who had traded her, the stepmother who had smiled through it, the lord who had called her property, the council that had nearly agreed because the paper was properly signed. She should have wanted revenge. Maybe part of her did, a small wounded part that remembered the collar closing around her throat. But then Grace squeezed her hand, and Emily saw not only herself in that contract. She saw the names hidden beneath the ink. The other girls, the ones who had not reached the moon court, the ones no hound had found in time. She lifted her chin. "No," she said. Her voice shook, but it did not break. "I want no girl to be sold again." The words moved through the wolves first. A low sound rose beyond the northern doors, not wild, not violent, but solemn, as if the entire pack had heard a vow worth carrying. Alexander's eyes softened for one breath, then turned to steel. He raised the contract high enough for the court, the council, the wolves, and Victor Ashford to see. "Then hear the judgment of the northern throne," he said. "No debt may claim a living soul. No signature taken under fear shall bind a free will. No old law will be used again to dress a cage as duty." Victor surged forward half a step. "You cannot erase centuries with a speech." Alexander looked at him. "No, I erase them with authority." He tore the contract in two. The sound was not loud, but the entire court seemed to feel it. The black ink flared across the pages, then recoiled as if burned by the moonlight. A dark symbol rose from the torn parchment, twisted in the air, and shot backward toward Victor, revealing the same rebellion mark beneath the collar of his shirt. Gasps broke through the hall. The proof was no longer hidden in clauses, witnesses, or fear. It marked him where everyone could see. Victor staggered, not from harm, but from exposure. His face emptied. The men who had once stood proudly beside him lowered their eyes. Mary Ann released Grace's shoulder as if the child had become too dangerous to touch. Richard sank to his knees, whispering Emily's name like a confession. Then Shadow moved. The royal hound stepped forward, lowered his massive head, and placed his muzzle gently over Emily's marked wrist. The silver light beneath her skin answered him, bright and pure. Beyond the doors, one wolf knelt, then another, then all of them, row by row, until the moon court became a sea of bowed heads beneath the falling snow. The council stared, speechless. The royal healers knelt next. Even the oldest elders bowed, not because Alexander ordered it, but because the wolves had chosen before humans could argue. Emily could barely breathe. She had entered that hall with a collar on her throat and a contract naming her property. Now the same court that had measured her value watched the northern wolves lower themselves at her feet. Alexander turned toward her. Slowly, deliberately, the Alpha King lowered himself to one knee. The movement stole every sound from the room. He did not reach for her without permission. He did not touch the collar. He only bowed his head before the girl who had asked for mercy when she could have demanded punishment. "Emily Carter is not a debt," he said, his voice carrying to every stone in the court. "She is not property. She is not a bargain struck by cowards or a prize claimed by traitors." He lifted his eyes to hers, winter gray and unwavering. "She is the queen my wolves chose." The mark on Emily's wrist flared toward him, and beneath his collar, a matching silver light answered from his chest, bright enough to make the torn contract in his hand crumble into ash. By dawn, the snow had stopped falling over the royal court. It rested on the black stone walls, on the steps where the wolves had knelt, on the torn remains of the old world that had believed a girl could be signed away and still call it law. Emily stood beneath the open northern doors with Grace tucked against her side and Shadow seated at her feet, his dark head high, his amber eyes calm for the first time since the trap. The silver collar was gone now. Alexander had not ripped it away in anger or made a spectacle of removing it. He had asked her permission, waited for her nod, and unlocked it with his own hands before placing it on the council table where every elder could see what their silence had protected. Without its cold weight against her throat, Emily felt strangely unsteady, as if freedom had its own gravity and she was still learning how to stand inside it. Victor Ashford and the men who had served his hidden rebellion were taken from the court under royal guard, not to vanish into whispered punishment, but to face open judgment before every pack whose daughters had disappeared into debt houses and private estates. Alexander ordered the records sealed, copied, and sent across the northern territories by sunrise. No name would be buried again beneath polite language. No family would be told their daughter had simply run away. Richard Carter remained on his knees long after the guards led Victor out. When he finally looked up at Emily, his face was gray with regret. "I thought I was saving the family," he whispered. Emily looked at the man who had raised her, failed her, and sold her, and the ache in her chest was not simple enough to be hatred. "You saved your fear," she said softly. "Not us." He bowed his head. Marian said nothing at all. Her careful composure had cracked the moment the court began asking how many years she had known about the locket, the threats, the buyers who visited after sunset. Emily did not ask Alexander to destroy them. She asked only that Grace be removed from their custody and placed under royal protection until the child could choose a safe home. That request, more than any title, made the oldest councilwoman lower her eyes in shame. The girl they had called property had used her first command not to punish, but to protect. When the hall finally emptied, Alexander walked with Emily into the moon court, where the air smelled of snow and extinguished torches. He kept a careful distance beside her, close enough to guard, far enough not to crowd. "You owe this court nothing tonight," he said. "Not an answer, not a vow, not a crown." Emily looked at him then, at the Alpha King whose mark had answered hers before hundreds of witnesses, at the man every story had painted as untouchable. In the pale morning, he looked less like a legend and more like someone who had carried a kingdom too long without letting anyone see the weight. "You called me queen," she said. "Because the wolves did." His voice was quiet. "But what you become from here must be your choice." The words settled over her more gently than any promise. Choice. No one had offered her that word at the Carter house. No one had written it into the contract. Emily turned toward the courtyard. Below, where royal wolves waited in patient silence, black, gray, and white forms gathered beneath the brightening sky. Shadow leaned against her leg with a soft huff, as if reminding her that she had chosen long before anyone named her. She had chosen Grace. She had chosen the trapped hound. She had chosen every girl whose name had risen from the hidden ink. Then I choose the first law of my reign, Emily said. Alexander stilled. The council members lingering near the doors looked up. Emily's voice was not loud, but it carried across the stone. Every dead house in the Northern Territories closes today. Every Omega held by contract is to be found, freed, and given shelter. Not tomorrow. Today. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Alexander bowed his head, not as a king indulging a fragile girl, but as a ruler accepting the first command of the queen his wolves had chosen. It will be done. The sun broke over the eastern wall, spilling gold across the snow. For the first time all night, Emily felt warmth touch her skin. Her fair hands were still marked by silver. Her dress was still torn. Her heart still carried the shape of